Hey,
Yep.
Charles.
Hey, good afternoon. Good afternoon,
We're,
brother.
we're live, Charles.
Okay. Aloha, no, everyone.
Aloha Friday, everybody.
Yeah, it's good on Monday. Good on Monday the 20th.
Oh my gosh, it's Monday already.
Yep.
All right, here we go. Now, okay. How you doing, my friend? How you doing?
Well, today was an interesting day. A lot of yin and yangs on Facebook, but for the most part, good. It's I like to say aloha to all the viewers. Thank you for joining us tonight. We got an interesting show with someone who I think will be beneficial for everyone to know if we are looking for a not a cure but a way of coping with this deadly disease. And the person we'll bring in on tonight will be that person. But in the meantime, while you're on the air with us right now, for those of you who are here, I'm going to ask you to please take this opportunity to share this right now. Okay, we want to get as many people on air with us as possible because we have a Hawaii boy who's making it big. There he is in South Korea, and he's one of the leading experts in this field. So I think what we're going to do tonight is we're going to guide you through when we bring him on and have him kind of tell you a little bit about his background. Yes, the race for a vaccine. Iolani grad.
I gotta tell you, man, I'm excited. I'm excited. A lot of people want to get a hold of this guy to talk to an interview, and this is one of his rare appearances that just we're so blessed to have. You know, that's one of the things, yeah, Charlie.
Yeah.
You know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody, and then you just reach out, ask real nicely, and
Yep.
I always aim my invitations to these people in a way that they're gonna really help the people of Hawaii. This guy is from Hawaii, and I'll let him talk about his background, but he's right out of Iolani High School in UH, and local boy. Now he's a director general at the International Vaccine Institute over there in South Korea. So this guy is big time, and I'm just so excited. I know a lot of people have been talking about, the vaccine is everybody's waiting for that to happen. So we're gonna get it tonight, firsthand from somebody who's actively involved in working towards a vaccine. You know, I did want to send a special mahalo to Rolly Nita, who's on almost every night from Texas, and that's 5 hours ahead, and it's 11:50 right now, almost midnight. So, and all we appreciate all of you coming on, but that we got to give an extra mahalo to those that are far away, and the time difference sometimes it's difficult. But look at all these guys talking about my hair. What's going on with my hair? I didn't even notice that I cut my hair. And Ikeda Baba Shop. Yep, you got it, bro. Wow, Mel, you got groomed. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I just gotta read this. Mel, you cut your hair that short just in case lockdown again. Yep, that's why. All right. Well, thank you guys for the comments on the hair. I do go to Ikeda Barbershop, and they're fantastic. I've been going there since I was a little boy. In fact, I think Ikeda was, you get your first haircut. It was at Ikeda. Back then, they used to give everybody gum. So they don't give gum anymore, but they're still just as friendly and awesome. And uh, not a dig on any other barber shops, but I'm just saying, you're happy with your provider, whatever it is, you don't change, and they are awesome. They're awesome. He made a mistake. He was shaving his beard and went a little bit too high. Here we go. Here we go, Tyson. Here we go. Anyway, that's coming from a guy who has no hair. So
No, but his Hawaiian name is No Hair. That's his
no
whole name.
hair.
Yeah,
You know
No Hair.
what? That is going to be his new name from now on. Tyson, you are now known as No Hair. No hair. Yeah, that Patsy said it might be a new shirt. Saw you on the news this evening. Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah, that was pretty cool. Mehelani reached out to me last week and did the interview, and it was on. So, again, just telling the facts, guys, what we talk about is not attacks on anybody. It's just the facts. And I think, we get, yeah, Patsy is laughing, Kirk. Charlie and I, we get reports from so many people across the island, actually across the state, about violations that are happening in progress and follically challenged, damn it, not bald. Everybody call Tyson no hair from now on, okay? But anyway,
He's telling you, get it right. He's follically challenged.
Yes, I know. I never heard that before. That would be the shirt. That should be the shirt. Not bald, just follically challenged.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is a teacher by trade. You know that, right?
No,
not too many people know that. He's actually an educator. Seriously. So
my brother has no hair, but I tell everybody he's just that he has a long smile.
Oh my God. That's why we come on early, so we can get the laughter all out of Charles before we actually go live with the guest. Because, can you imagine if he starts laughing when Dr. Kim is on? Oh my gosh.
No. Uncle know me by now.
Look at that. Roland says, thanks for the mention. I'm from Kikaha, but been in Houston for 30 years. Oh, man. Yeah, I got a cousin that lives in San Antonio. I got another cousin that lives in Austin. And I went, that's where I did my basic training in my tech school in Texas. I did my basic training was in Lackland at San Antonio. And then I went up to Shepherd Air Force Base up in Wichita Falls, which is right up close to the Oklahoma border. And I stayed there for almost a year learning how to fix telephones and electronics, and got electrocuted a couple of times. And I think that's why I get curly hair. That's why I got to keep them short.
Well, you saw what Judy said.
No.
He says the Hawaiian says people bullhead are lucky because they get more face. Oh,
yeah, you know what they say, right? You know what the old saying, grass no grow on busy streets. So anyway. So we're excited tonight, guys. We thank you guys again for joining us while we hang on and wait for Dr. Kim. When we get these faraway visitors, I always worry about internet connection, and you just hope, because gosh, if he doesn't show up tonight, then you guys are gonna have to bear with me reading this article. Let's just read the article to all of you. But Charlie, we had some action today on Facebook, man. We talked about I guess I'll just say this. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, and we whatever we discuss, we welcome the debate, we welcome the dialogue. We've had people confront us and said, how come you don't bring people that have a different opinion? And we have. And if you have someone that is has a different position than we do, or any of the guests that we bring on, share them with us and we'll get them on. But Dr. Kim is ringing the bell, so let us bring Dr. Kim in right now. I'm excited, man. You excited, Charles?
Yes, I am.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3, boom. And there is Dr. Kim.
No, that's his.
No, that must be his staff. Yeah, because that's sure as heck. That's not him.
Yeah, hi, I'm IT support, and Dr. Jerome will be soon. Please just wait for a while.
Okay.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
Hey, see, I can speak. You guys never know I can speak Korean, eh? 감사합니다.
Okay.
Unreal, eh? He ran away. He's so scared because now he know that I know what he's saying.
If you heard him clearly, he said, okay, enough already, and he walked away.
We invited all the doctors as well. to come on and because I think a lot of people want to hear this message.
There he is.
Hey.
Now that, hang on, Doc. Now that is Dr. Kim. Yes, there he
Yes.
is.
Yeah. You don't know how many times I had to pose to take that picture. I was not.
I mean, that's
smiling.
such a nice picture, man. This is bizarre because, and actually, we by the way, Doc, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Mel, that's Charlie.
Aloha.
And we were just talking before you came on that we're just so blessed and thankful. You're in high demand right now, and to grace us with your presence on this show means a lot to not just Charlie and I, but to all the people here in Hawaii for you to take the time out of your very busy schedule to join us. So thank you. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure.
And also you're a ILH graduate, right?
I'm an ILH graduate, although I guess now we are actually officially in the second division. The junior division.
The junior division. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations.
When we turn it over to you, give us some background. A lot of people don't know much. If they're an HMSA member, they get the magazine, they know quite a bit. But it's so funny. I was talking to a friend of mine, and he saw me post that you were coming on, and he says, "Brah, he was just on HMSA book." So a lot of people now know of you. But why don't you spend some time, talk to us how in the world you ended up in South Korea from Kaneohe?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. But I grew up right next to King Intermediate School. But I guess it's middle school now, but it used to be intermediate school. And we moved into town because in high school, and bit of a shock. We moved to Kaimaki, and but it was closer to Iolani, and when I went to UH, I could actually walk to school. So I did. And I was at the University of Hawaii and kind of wanted to get out of Hawaii to go to graduate school. So I applied to medical school. And when I got in, my cousin who was in the Army said, "Hey, you know what? The Army has this great program. You join, you sign up, they'll pay for medical school, they'll give you a stipend every month. And, at the end, no debts." I thought, oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And my dad said, if you want to go away to the mainland, you have to use this scholarship. So I actually went into the Air Force instead of the Army. And it was fine. They paid for medical school. I got to the end of medical school in New Haven and Yale, and they said, so do you want to come to an Air Force hospital for training? And I said, I think I want to go to Duke. And they said, okay, go. So I went there, and they let me do all my training, infectious disease, internal medicine, in North Carolina. And then they let me get a grant. They extended my stay at Duke. And then it was the beginning of the first Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. I wrote to the Air Force and said, hey, I got another grant. Can I stay here another 5 years? And I got this letter back, an email. Now, I don't know who you are, but really, you should be working with the Air Force. So they moved me to San Antonio for a month, and the war was over. And then they said, well, we're doing research with the Army at Walter Reed, and we need to send an Air Force person. Why don't you, if you're interested, why don't you go? And I've been working on HIV vaccines, and they were working on HIV vaccines, and so it was perfect. So I went and I joined the Army. I was the only person in a blue uniform when I got there, which is fine. And at the end of that time, married, and you have to pay them back a year for every year. So I paid back my time, and I really liked what I was doing. So I talked to my old boss, Bob Redfield, and he said, yeah, why don't you think about staying here longer? And I asked the Air Force, and they said, no, you're going to go to Japan. So I got out and went to work for Bob Redfield again at the University of Maryland. So he's now the CDC director. The guy with the beard used to be my boss in the military. And I was there for 2 years, and I thought, I really want to do research. I like taking care of patients, but I want to do vaccine research. So I joined back. I went back to the old program, but switched from the Air Force to the Army. And it took a while to do that. But by the year 2000, I was back in the Army, working at Walter Reed, working for a woman named Debbie Burks. And Debbie is actually the person who's I guess the COVID coordinator now at the White House.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Very odd group of people to meet while you're working for the military. But, sometimes you meet people who go on to do different things, and they definitely did. So I did vaccine research and was at Tripler for 2 years. And I thought I was going to stay there for the rest of my career. I was now doing infectious disease work and had a lab at the University of Hawaii. And then Debbie called, Debbie Burks, and she said, we need your help in Thailand. And, we'd been to Thailand for 6 months to help set up a trial. And my wife said, let's go. So we went from Tripler to Thailand, and I did an HIV vaccine trial there. And then the Army brought me back to Washington. I stayed there until I retired, working on HIV vaccines. And, the thing about the Army is, it's kind of unpredictable. I was at 20 years, and I thought, do I want to stay? And this job opened up to work on vaccines other than HIV, to work on, cholera vaccines and typhoid vaccines and all these vaccines that they need all over the world, but that no one wants to make because they're not going to be profitable. So my wife said, you know what, we should go. That was 5 years ago. And and it's been really interesting working on something other than HIV. And of course, COVID comes up, and Korea is, the country that got hit second, after China. Korea was the next big outbreak. So we turned all of our, the talent here at the Institute, which is, devoted to developing vaccines. And we said, you know what, we're not going to make our own vaccine. Let's just help everyone else make a vaccine as quickly as possible. So, we can work with company X doing laboratory assays. We can work with this other company to test their vaccine in the clinic. We can work with a big company to test a vaccine in Africa. And so that was our strategy. I think in retrospect, it was probably the right decision. So that's how I got where I am.
Wow. So you've been in Korea now for 5 years?
Yeah, it's been quite an experience.
Amazing. Well, there is the race. The race for the vaccine is on, and we kind of wanted to hear from you. Where are we at? We hear, everybody you listen to has a different version of what's happening, and if you follow social media, how much of it is real, how much of it is not. You have different companies promising different things, but where are we really with the vaccine for COVID-19?
So, at Christmas time last year, we had no idea this was going to hit us. And now we're at the stage where what normally would take 5 to 10 years, we're entering the final stage of testing. So when you look at a vaccine, you test it first in animals just to make sure that it's kind of doing the right thing. It's making the right protective responses. We call them immune responses. And if it does, then you say, okay, well, we're going to test it in humans. The first test in humans is usually in less than 50 people. And it really is just to make sure the vaccine is safe. I mean, we can check, make sure that in humans, as opposed to animals, that it's making the right protective responses. It's making these proteins called antibodies that inactivate viruses, or it's making killer cells that will kill the virus if it's infected another cell. We can do a little bit of that, but really the first phase is around safety. The second phase, which is, 200, 300, 400 people, really helps us determine, does the vaccine do what it's supposed to do in the right population? So if we're going to test, if the vaccine is for infants, then we would have to test the vaccine, first in adults who are healthy, then in adolescents, and then in toddlers, and then in infants. So we eventually move in phase 2 into the population we want the vaccine to work in. So for COVID vaccine, it's everybody. And what you really want to do is make sure that that vaccine at the dose that we're giving, or if we're giving it at 0 and 1 month, that the dose and the schedule are right and are making the right protective responses, because the next phase, which is called phase 3, is really huge. I mean, it can be tens of thousands of people. For COVID vaccines, they're guessing that each trial of a vaccine will be 20 to 30,000 volunteers, which is a lot. And that means that half of them will get enrolled and get the vaccine, and half might get inactive substance or a different vaccine that is not for COVID. And then you have to follow them, and you actually have to make sure that that everything is going right, that bad things aren't happening to them, so the vaccine is safe. And then you have to look for COVID infection. And we think it's easy, you just go out and get a swab, but imagine having to do that in 30,000 people and test them every 3 months or every 6 months. So that's a huge number of tests. But you have to do it because when you take that, say the vaccine works, it protects people against COVID infection or disease, then you have to go with your 100,000 pieces of paper to the US Food and Drug Administration, and they will look at every single paper. And they will ask you about whether you think your mathematicians, your statistician, did the right thing. Did they do the right analysis? Really, did you really see something that was 70%, or was it really 40%? And they ask you these questions over the course of a year. And at the end of the year, they have a big meeting. And if they like they agree with you, they say, okay, fine, you can sell the vaccine. But they absolutely have to be convinced that the vaccine is safe and works as you say it works. Now we're compressing all that into 18 months. And we're in phase 3 now for at least 2 vaccines, and we're getting ready to go into phase 3 now for at least 2 more. So in the course of, from January until now in July, we have vaccines actually entering the final stage of testing. And, the United States, unfortunately, it has a lot of infections right now. So we actually may be able to recruit enough people in the United States to have an answer, does the vaccine work or not, by the end of the year. Now that's only part 1, right? So when you make a vaccine, step 1, you have to prove that it works. Step 2, you have to make it, a lot of it, and really high quality, because vaccines have to be high quality. And then you have to figure out how to use it. That's step number 3. So right now we're doing pretty good on step number 1, on proving that it works. We're part of the way there. The vaccines look like they're making the right kind of protective responses, at least from what we're guessing. The US actually has a plan to manufacture some of these vaccines before we actually know that they work. So that, in December, AstraZeneca, one of the companies, says, we have a vaccine that protects. Well, the US government says, well, and guess what? We've made 200 million doses of this. So we can start vaccinating Americans right away. Now, not all the countries in the world have this. And I think this is part of they call it Operation Warp Speed. They're actually making some educated guesses about what vaccines will work and what can be manufactured so that they'll have enough vaccine when the vaccines are shown to be protective. So I'm somewhat optimistic that we'll at least have an answer, and that by next year people will be vaccinated, assuming that the vaccine protects.
Doctor, some of the questions that's popping up on our screen now, they're asking the difference between a flu vaccine and a COVID vaccine.
That's a great question. And so we have all different kinds of vaccines. And then I think that this gets to the question. Some vaccines can be pretty simple, like the vaccine that everyone took for polio. It's a little tube, you just swallow it. That vaccine actually has live polio virus in it, the one that you took by mouth. The newer the version that they're using now in the United States, they inject the polio vaccine. They kill the virus and they inject it into your arm. So those are 2 kinds of vaccines that have been around for a long time. Especially easy to grow up a virus and kill it with heat or formalin, and then purify it and then inject it. So some of the vaccines that are actually now in phase 3 are just that. They're heat inactive, or they're killed virus, whole killed virus, we call it. Those are the vaccines that have been developed primarily in China. So we're not sure that we're ever going to see them in the United States. But those vaccines are in phase 3 trials. Thousands of people have been enrolled already in Brazil, and thousands in China as well. Then there are the vaccines that are like we call them chimpanzee adenoviruses, which sounds kind of funny, but it is actually a type of virus that infects chimpanzees. A similar form, human adenoviruses, infect humans. The nice thing about adenovirus is you can take a little bit of the COVID-19 and insert it into the adenovirus genetic information, DNA, and make a vaccine that is a little bit like adenovirus, but makes a part of the COVID-19 virus. And that generates this protective response. I mean, adenoviruses generate really strong protective responses. So when you put a little bit of COVID in that vaccine, you get this really great response against COVID-19. The other nice thing about adenoviruses, like the AstraZeneca, the Oxford vaccine, they call it, is that you can make a lot of it very quickly. And that's important for this. Good immune responses, you can make a lot of it. It's been given to thousands of people. It appears to be safe. So again, all kind of the right things when we're rushing to get, prove the vaccine works. That's going to be really important. The flu vaccines are grown in eggs. So none of the COVID vaccines are actually grown in eggs at this point. The viruses are taken and then they're killed. So they're very similar to the polio vaccine or like the whole inactivated vaccine. Other kinds of polio viruses are made in a slightly different way, maybe not in eggs, but in cells. And so, you can grow them up in these giant stainless steel tanks and purify them. And they're relatively straightforward, relatively easy to make. And the COVID vaccines have been, at least the ones being developed in North America and Europe, have been a little more complicated than the flu vaccine. Some of them have never been in, so the DNA and RNA vaccine, the RNA, I think the American company is called Moderna. Moderna has a vaccine made of RNA. There is not a single approved RNA vaccine, but Moderna was first out of the block. They got their vaccine tested in humans starting in March of this year, so very, very fast. And they just published their first human clinical trial data, and it looks pretty good. It's doing the things you want it to do. Whether it will actually protect in the end, we don't know. But it's not a form that we have ready for the flu vaccine yet. But could we? And, everyone knows, right? Sometimes the flu vaccine works, and sometimes you hear the public health guy, the director of the State Department say, this year, not a good match with the circulating flu, the flu that is circulating in Hawaii. And when the vaccine doesn't completely match the flu that's circulating, the protection drops off. The nice thing about these RNA vaccines, so if we could take a Moderna flu vaccine, if they had a real one, and they could make it very quickly so that there would hardly ever be a miss. We would have the right vaccine for the right flu epidemic that's breaking out, probably in Hawaii in the next few months. And that would be great because it would make the flu vaccines better. So it's not exactly like the flu vaccine, but if we could use some of the new technologies, we could make a better flu vaccine, which would be great. So I kind of long answer, sorry.
No. Good. Interesting. Very, very interesting.
The nice thing is you answer it in a way that even dum-dums like us can understand. I mean,
no.
So thank you. I have a really, really silly question. I think one's on everybody's mind is how do you find volunteers?
For vaccine trials?
For the COVID trials, yeah.
Yeah, and so depending on so if I were a company like AstraZeneca, I would be in touch with different universities probably, or research centers that do vaccine clinical trials around the United States. Or now there's an effort called Active. And I think that the University of Hawaii may have one of the sites, although I'm not absolutely sure about that. But basically, a lot of the National Institute of Health clinical research sites have been pooled together into this giant network of sites that will allow the United States to rapidly test COVID-19 vaccines. And so which vaccine will open up where is another open question, because I think the FDA, the US FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, doesn't want to mix the same vaccines so they don't want a single site to test multiple different vaccines. Again, because it just gets confusing. What if a person takes one vaccine and then decides to enroll in a second study and gets a second vaccine? You won't be able to sort out the right effect. So you can go to the, I think it's spelled ACTIV website, and they will begin to tell you where in the United States the vaccine trials are opening up. I'm not sure if there's a trial site open in Hawaii yet, though.
Yeah, man, that'd be interesting to see how many people. I guess a lot of people would want to volunteer to try to help, but gosh, that's like some unknown territory right now with the COVID-19.
Yeah, you know, it's amazing. People have even volunteered to be infected. So to participate in what we call challenge studies, 10,000 people have volunteered to participate in challenge studies. To be,
you guys pay them? Do they get paid?
Actually, I don't know. Some, at least where I used to be before, yes, they did get paid.
Okay.
You know, it carries risks. And typically, you know, you guess that they want to do it in people who are young, who would have less risk of complications.
Right.
And right now, there are no active challenge studies going on. But, you know, in the US Army and elsewhere, not only the US Army, at the University of Maryland in Baltimore, they do challenge studies. We give people cholera and typhoid, malaria, dengue, in order to accelerate vaccine research. Sometimes you have to do these challenge studies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was just a release with Russia taking a known vaccine and just modifying it a little to address COVID. How, in your opinion, how does that look as far, because they're trying it on the Russian, I guess, like you said, the army. Yeah. They're trying it on them, and they believe that they have something that's breaking soon. But they said that what their philosophy was to take existing vaccines, look at it, and just tweak it a little to address it to COVID. Is that a practice that's done regularly, or is this something that's relatively new that they're doing?
So no, that's a great question, and it gets to how some of these groups, like the Oxford group, got the vaccine so quickly. So Oxford took a chimpanzee adenovirus. Johnson & Johnson used, we call it a type 26 human adenovirus. And what they do is they tweak the virus slightly and insert a little bit of COVID genetic information that will code for, you know, one of these. I think everyone's seen the cartoon of the virus with the little clubs that are sticking out. Right. They take the genetic information that codes for that club, they stick it into an adenovirus, and when the adenovirus grows, it makes a little bit of this club protein, and the body recognizes it and says, "Oh my goodness, it's not supposed to be here," and makes infection-fighting proteins or antibodies against we call it the spike protein because it looks like a spike, and that's how you get vaccines done quickly. You take something like Ad26 or chimpanzee adenovirus, or I think in the Russian case they're using type 5 adenovirus. I saw it on CNN. I haven't actually seen any papers from them. And they insert a little bit of genetic information in there, and it should work. The Chinese have done it with adenovirus type 5. The one problem that we see, and this came up in one of the Chinese studies that was published, a company called CanSino has one of these adenoviruses that's been modified. The problem is that most people in the United States and in many parts of the world have seen this adenovirus before. You know, the immune system has memory, and you want it to, because if you got the cold, if you got the flu, you don't want to be infected by that flu virus again. So your body has this memory of having seen it before, and as soon as it appears again, the body makes a strong defensive response against it. The problem with some of these adenoviruses that are tweaked is that the body has seen them before. And when it does that, it ignores the COVID. It responds to the adenovirus. So it misses the target. It goes after the thing that it knows. And that actually causes the vaccine to work as well as it should. And so in the Chinese study, the vaccine looked like it worked great in the people who had never seen adenovirus type 5 before. But in people who had seen it before, the responses actually were pretty low. In fact, in some cases, not detectable. And that's actually the issue. And the other part was that, at least in with this particular vaccine, a significant number of people who had seen it before had fever. And you don't want your vaccine to cause a symptom similar to what people see when they have the disease. I mean, this happened during the Ebola vaccine trials. One of the vaccines, which actually works, has a side effect, which it gives you aches and pains, which some people with Ebola have, and that made people very worried that they might have been exposed to Ebola. And it makes it very difficult to argue that the vaccine is completely without side effects, and people get worried that they're being subjected to risk. So you have to be really careful when you make a vaccine to control the number of safety issues that are found, to really make sure. I mean, you're giving these vaccines to healthy people. You want them to stay healthy.
Now, what happens if during these trials you give a test subject and they get really sick? I mean, and it seems like it's long term. How do you counteract that at that point, since you've already infected them?
No, so with the vaccines, you don't infect people. You just give them the vaccine. And the most common bad side effects are immediate allergies to the vaccine. And so sometimes, a person's arm will swell up. Sometimes they'll have fever. These tend to go away fairly quickly. We very rarely have to put someone in the hospital because they get short of breath. That is very, very uncommon, but it does happen. And so if you go to a clinic that does vaccinations for studies, for research, they'll often have a cart with medicines on it that will allow them to give you the things that you need right away to stabilize you. And then you're admitted to the hospital. And often the studies, so for instance, when we do studies, we have insurance that will allow, if a person needs to go to the hospital, the insurance will pay for it, so that the volunteer doesn't bear the cost of having to go to the hospital.
Okay. One last question to clear up, I guess, some of the conspiracy theories that's been flying around, because you have made mention of China before, that they worked on certain things. Is this virus, COVID, is it man-made?
So I think I used to work in a lab that did virus sequencing. And actually, some of the people I used to work with have sent us some sequencing information. They're US Army types. And there are certain ways that we manipulate viruses. So we can insert new sequences or change sequences. And usually they leave behind a fingerprint, a molecular fingerprint that the virus has been tampered with. And particularly adenoviruses, there is a certain way that you modify the virus in order to make changes. And you don't see any evidence of those fingerprints in these viruses. And also we have a fair amount of information that there are very similar viruses in bats. In fact, 97% similarity with the viruses that we're seeing now. And there's some thought that there's another animal that's missing. So it went from bats to some other animal. At first they thought it was pangolins, which are a special type of spiny anteater, I guess. And then from them to humans. But that connection is less clear now that we have more sequence information than it was before. But it's not uncommon for these things to transition from one to the other and to change themselves slightly as they do that. The other part of this is, we know that the virus can mutate itself. We know that it doesn't do it very frequently, that the changes are very small. For HIV, sometimes in a single person, the sequences will be different as much as 15 to 20% in a single person. This virus, you have 99.9% of the sequences are the same. So it's actually very different. It doesn't mutate very much. So I'm sorry, to answer that question, I guess most of the information would tell us, based on what we know about the way viruses are mutated in the laboratory, that this does not have the right fingerprints of something that was manipulated in the lab.
Okay. Now,
I want to just follow up on the mutation part, because I know you just said it doesn't mutate that much. So the vaccines that I've been working on now, how does that compensate, or how do you adjust the vaccines in the event some of these viruses have mutated or have changed their structure? The vaccines that are being tested and created, do they address that issue, the mutation issue?
Yeah, so I should answer that one up front first, because I get really excited when I talk about this, and I may miss the question. But the answer is we don't think that the current circulating strains are that different from the vaccines that have been developed. So at least for now, based on what we know now, the vaccine should cover the strains, even the one that's taken over in Europe and is now spreading in the United States. The data that we have suggests that the immune responses against the original virus, the first virus to go to Europe or the first viruses to come to the United States, managed to inactivate even the new virus. So that's the one probably most important thing. Will the virus change itself over time is a question that everyone is asking, and we don't know the answer to that. The one good piece of news is that the coronavirus changes itself very slowly, 10 times less quickly than influenza, which is hundreds and thousands of times less quickly than HIV. So at least for now, the virus that we have the vaccines for is similar enough to the viruses that are circulating in the United States and around the world, so that we're reasonably sure that the vaccine will protect against all the current circulating strains. What will it be like 2 years from now when the virus has had time to get used to us? You know, viruses adapt to human populations. If we don't manage to, eliminate it, could the virus adapt and change itself enough so that, 2 years from now we'll be dealing with COVID-21? We don't know. And will we have to have, COVID-19 and COVID-21 in the same vaccine? Again, we don't know. One of the good things is that if it becomes like the flu, then hopefully we will be able to develop vaccines routinely in a year or less. The beauty of the flu is, this is a vaccine that changes every year, but we managed to develop a new one every year. So there are mechanisms to do that, and mechanisms to make hundreds of millions of doses of flu vaccine. In fact, one of my colleagues estimated that in the world, we have the capacity to manufacture 10 billion doses of vaccine in a year, which is a huge, and a lot of it is what we call surge capacity. I mean, it would, be useful if we had a massive new flu outbreak, flu pandemic, or in this case, COVID.
So if, I got a two-part question. One is those trials at the third phase, once you get past that, what is your estimation as far as that the vaccine will be ready for market?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So normally it takes the FDA, a year. There's a way to shortcut the process. So, all these companies, all their new vaccines are lined up and the FDA does them in order.
Okay.
You can get something called a priority voucher, which means that you've worked on a very unknown disease or a very rare disease. And to reward you for that, the FDA gives you a little slip of paper that allows you to cut to the front of the line. So priority vouchers cut about 6 months off the time for review, which is really important, right? If you have a new drug or something that's going to make $1 billion a year, if you're the company, you don't want to wait a year. You want to get it approved as soon as possible. So a couple of the companies have already said that they've been approved for voucher. So that would speed them up anyway. The other part of it is, the Food and Drug Administration, because of the nature of this pandemic, will probably give priority review anyway to any COVID vaccine that looks like it's protecting people. And that's really important. And, will it take a month or 2 weeks or 2 months? We don't know. But it's not going to be a year. And how much information will they need? And so this gets to something that I don't know the answer to. Will the FDA start to talk to companies as the data are? So usually, like for instance, at the end of our phase 3 trial, we announced that these were the results. We published the paper. At the same time, now 3 months later, we went to the FDA to talk about the data. Now, we never took it forward for licensure, but the FDA was engaged in talking to us and looking at the data and asking lots of questions about, oh, you should have done it this way, you should have done this, and then you want them to do that because you want them to absolutely be sure that they agree with you. Now, so at the end of so say we're now in December and a company announces, okay, our vaccine looks like it protects and is safe. I would guess that pretty soon after that, the company would begin to discuss how that data is being analyzed with the Food and Drug Administration. Again, to make sure that, everything is in line and that the Food and Drug Administration agrees with the way things are being presented. And they could actually give a special kind of permission, emergency use, before they give licensure. But again, we don't know what the FDA intends to do. What they did tell us in a guidance, in a set of guidelines, is that they wanted the protective effect to be above 50%, 50% or more. And everyone goes, 50%, that's not good. Actually, sometimes the flu vaccine is like that. But also that the effect that we see in a clinical trial doesn't tell us the true effect of the vaccine. The oral cholera vaccine that our institute has helped to develop has when we compare it, against a placebo, against something that doesn't work, it's about 55 to 60% vaccine efficacy. And everyone goes, that's not very much. But if you use that vaccine, you vaccinate half of a city, it'll have an 85% protective effect. Why? Because you're getting this herd immunity with our vaccine. So just because we know what the effect is in a trial doesn't mean we know the effect in a large population. We still need to collect what we call real world evidence, because the true effect of the vaccine could be much greater than what you see when you do a trial, an experiment. So I know it's a long answer to your question, but the FDA will want to know, want to get a lot of information. First, that it's safe. Second, what is the effect? And how confident are we that it is, 50%? And, they'll expedite the review. At the same time, the US government has made hundreds of millions of doses. Actually, Dr. Fauci said this in an interview a few weeks ago, that they're going to commit to start making it. And if you look at the timelines that the companies have published, many of them are talking about starting manufacturing of the vaccine in the fall of this year. So again, now, do we know that the vaccines work? No. Will all of them work? Possibly not. So you might end up with 200 million doses of vaccine, that's not useful on the one hand. On the other hand, what you could have is 2 or 3 vaccines that are useful and for which you have hundreds of millions of doses ready when the FDA moves, which is good.
Okay.
Yeah, there's been some talk about antibodies and the fact that the antibodies now, some experts are saying, do not last forever in a body, that it's temporary. And there's also reports of people that have tested positive or had COVID and then later tested positive again. Either it's the same virus being kept dormant in the body, or they caught it again from someone else. Anything that you can share with us on that antibody issue?
Yeah, so antibodies are complicated. So antibodies are infection-fighting proteins, right? The beauty of an antibody is that it looks like a little Y, and each of the arms of the Y has an area that is very specific for certain things. And so in this case, these little antibodies will be specific for COVID. A different group of those antibodies are what we call neutralizing antibodies. And those are the ones that do what they sound like they do. They bind to and inactivate the virus. And we consider them almost in a special class. But there's another group of antibodies, we call them functional antibodies, and they do other things that allow the body to rapidly clear infection. And actually that depends not on the 2 little arms of the Y, but on the stem of the Y. So antibodies have lots of different functions. When we're measuring neutralizing antibody, which is what many of the people, the published results comment on, those neutralizing antibodies appear to be relatively low in people with asymptomatic disease or mildly symptomatic disease, and higher in people with severe disease. And so people have said, oh, well, that might mean that you're not protected anymore. We don't formally know that. And the other part of it is, right now, it's still early days. We've had 6 months to develop these neutralizing antibody assays, and not all of them are, in the end, we want to have an assay that we're absolutely confident in. That if I did it in our lab here at IVI in Seoul, and someone else did it at the FDA in Rockville, in Maryland, that we'd come up with exactly the same answer. And at this point, we don't have that kind of standardization. So I'm not sure that we actually know what the true levels are. So that's point one. I think point two is, differentiating again between the regular antibodies. So the antibody tests, the rapid tests that everyone's talking about, I'm antibody positive. Those are rapid tests. Those antibodies are not necessarily neutralizing. And so they may last for a longer period of time. And again, we don't know. And we don't know that these are a marker of protection. I mean, they show that you might have been infected in the past, but they don't tell you that you've been protected. The final part of it is, we have something, the immune system is very powerful. It has a memory, and you want it to have a memory, right? If you had chickenpox, you don't want to come down with chickenpox again. Well, your immune system remembers having had chickenpox. Like I've got a pock mark in the middle of my forehead. And it means that for the rest of my life, I should be able to mount a response against chickenpox, and you want it. So what we don't know is that the immune system, the memory for COVID-19 isn't still going to be protective or partially protective. So that say you were exposed, say you got infected in April, in the first batch of people who got infected in Hawaii. Then, 6 months later, you happen to be in California, or go to Las Vegas, you get infected in Las Vegas, or you get exposed in Las Vegas. Even though your antibodies may not fully protect you against infection, what they could do is they could make sure that the disease that you experience is actually much less. So you may not get sick, or you may just develop a runny nose, and after a couple of days it'll be over. We really don't know, which is one of the reasons several groups are talking about maybe doing challenge studies, not in people who are naive, but in people who've been infected, so that we can actually prove that infection actually protects you against the disease. That's a really critical question, because some people are going around saying, I've been infected, I'm safe. Well, we don't know that. And it's really important for the government to know, because it helps us understand what we need to do in order to protect the population against infection.
Okay. Now, Doctor, another question popped up. Can you give us an explanation what is herd immunity and how long does it last?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So herd immunity is nice. So I think everyone is familiar with distancing, right? So stay 2 yards from the nearest, 6 feet from the nearest person. So that's distancing. A mask is another way of distancing, right? You're putting a barrier between you and another person. And maybe if you're wearing a mask, 6 feet isn't necessary, although that's still the recommendation, stay 6 feet away. Antibodies, all these protective immune responses create immunological distance. They kind of protect you. And herd immunity, if a single person gets infected, on the average with COVID-19, he or she will infect 2 other people. Sometimes it may be more, depending on which study it is. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 5. But every single person can infect a certain number of other people, assuming everyone is naive. Now, if you surround that person who's infected with a bunch of people who had the disease before, they're not going to get infected, and they're not going to transmit it to other people. So you've effectively surrounded this person with immune responses that protect everybody. And that's what herd immunity is. It means that there are enough people who have antibody from vaccine or infection so that even though a person who is not been vaccinated and never been infected could get infected, he or she cannot spread that disease to other people. The immune system of all the people around them are protecting them and protecting that person against, preventing that person from spreading it to other people. And it differs for different viruses and different vaccines. So not all vaccines create herd immunity. It might be really important to know that this vaccine, if we have one, does.
Okay. All right.
And that is the plan for the COVID vaccine, is to be able to create that herd immunity.
Right. Same idea.
Now, Doc, I guess one question that continually pops up with a lot of the layman's argument, because, obviously your knowledge, you're an expert in this, but there's some, I guess what I'm trying to say, there's a lot of people that flirt with the dangers with COVID. They say, I don't want to wear a mask. Nothing's going to happen to me. So many people are recovering, but yet we see signs of so many people with debilitating medical issues on the back end. So I don't know what's better, just having a thing succumb to me and take my life, or living the rest of my life in a really a medical disadvantage. So I guess the question is, what makes COVID so dangerous? I know it's new, but they're always comparing it to the flu. But a lot of times we hear the experts say, no, it's not the flu. This thing is dangerous. What makes COVID dangerous?
So a couple of things. So first, can I do a little bit of editorializing?
Yeah. Okay.
Around the mask. So, and I actually, if you go back to February and March, there are videos of me saying, masks, we're not entirely sure that masks protect. I think the data are a little clearer now, and actually many of us had been thinking about it backwards. When you see the pictures of doctors in surgery wearing masks, they're not protecting themselves against the patient. They're protecting the patient against themselves. The germs that the doctor are carrying in his mouth and in his nose hopefully won't get to the patients, because they're doing surgery. The way we have to think about masks is not that they're protecting us. The masks are protecting everyone else. So when the US government changed its mind about masks, what they are saying is, we don't know who's infected. You should behave and wear a mask as though you're infected because, and this is the problem with COVID, so much infection, 80% of infections are mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic. Up to a third of infections may be asymptomatic. Those people who don't have any symptoms can still spread the disease. So the solution is wear a mask. Let's assume everyone is infected and could spread it. And if you do that, we have some really amazing data around masks now. There are two women hairdressers in the US in the South. They were both infected. They were both having symptoms. They both wore a mask. They saw they took care of 140 clients. Not a single client got infected. They were wearing masks. So the thing about masks is they don't protect you. You're protecting other people from you. And if it's your children or your grandparents or your mom and dad or your elderly neighbor, it's all these people that you're really protecting against infection by wearing that mask. So in the US, we got into the idea that it might be protecting us. No, this is protecting other people. And it might be the flu to you because you're 18 or 20 and don't have any risk factors and running marathons. But it's a very different disease for your 80-year-old grandmother or grandfather, or someone who smokes or someone who has diabetes. So wear it because we care about other people. Okay, so that's the editorial. The thing about COVID that is so dangerous, the thing that makes it different from SARS-1. So SARS-1, the original SARS from 2002, actually I was at Tripler at the time. I was on an airplane to Thailand and there were two of us on a 747. It was amazing. But SARS had a mortality rate of 10%. I mean, it was huge compared to the mortality rate from this SARS, from SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Under optimal circumstances, like in Korea or now in the United States, it's between 2 and 3%, not 10%. Now, 2 and 3% mortality is still 10 times more lethal than the flu. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The other part is, if you had SARS-CoV-1, the original SARS, you were really sick when you were spreading it. I mean, you were getting ready to go to the hospital. In the hospital, you had a fever. You had all these signs and symptoms. The bad thing about SARS-CoV-2 is that you don't have any. And you're walking around, joking and smoking, singing in the choir at church and spreading the disease. And that's what makes it dangerous. And, we have in our population now, I mean, people are living longer. I mean, healthy living has helped us all. We have lots of people who are over 80. I mean, Hawaii is one of the, has one of the most aged populations in the United States. It's those people who are at risk. And, none of us want to hurt our grandparents or my parents who are in their late 80s. I would be devastated if I caused them to contract a disease that might kill them. The other thing that we're not thinking about is, so even the young people in the United States, 20% of them have to go to the hospital. That's a lot. And the average cost, now this is if you're in network, I guess if you're in a network like HMSA and you go to in-network provider, the average cost that was reported in one of these insurance magazines was $37,000. That's a lot. If you were out of network, it was 70. That's even more. So, health insurance is important. Health is important. And even if HMSA is paying 80% of your $37,000 bill, that's a lot. And, do you want to waste? I mean, wear a mask. Have everyone else wear a mask and save yourself $37,000.
Okay. Wow, that's never looked at it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, and so I have a good friend. I talk to him every week. Actually, you've probably seen him on television. He's the guy with the bow tie, Peter Hotez.
Yes.
So, yeah, he's always on CNN and everywhere talking about COVID-19. And we talk once a week. We call it the happy hour, but it's my Saturday morning. And Texas, the ICUs are full. And when the ICUs are full and people can't get the care that they need or have to be transferred, extended different distances in order to be put into intensive care, that's when you start to see people die. And that's what happened in Italy when they ran out of intensive care unit beds. And, they had people on, breathing machines, ventilators on the regular wards. And, that's really suboptimal care. And that's when you start to see higher rates of death. So we're reaching that point in many of the states in the United States, luckily not in Hawaii, which is good.
I wanted to revisit that the mortality rate. You said 2 to 3% with COVID, and it's 10 times more lethal than from the flu. A lot of people talk about the number of flu deaths, or more people die from the flu than COVID. So how does the mortality rate? What's the mortality rate for the flu? And I understand there's so many different strains of influenza, and when they talk the numbers, they combine it. Any strain of influenza is counted in the big number. But how is the COVID mortality rate higher than the flu mortality rate?
So, and this is, data from, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Redfield at the US CDC. In an average flu season, maybe 100,000 people come down with or die of the flu in the United States. We're already over 130,000, and the year's only half done. And we're in the summer when we're supposed to be all protected and we weren't supposed to be seeing much disease. When the winter hits and when we have flu season on top of COVID season, we could really see significant numbers of deaths. Right now, COVID is on track to being the leading infectious disease killer in the world this year. I mean, really amazing. Given the fact that we could have prepared, that we shut down entire countries, that at one point billions of people around the world were on lockdown. We should have been using the time to prepare, to be ready with intensive care, with more gloves. I mean, I was on a call with colleagues in Florida. They're beginning to run out of gloves again and masks. So again, when you think about these pandemics, preparation is really important. The Korean government had a previous really bad experience with a different coronavirus called MERS in 2015. So after that, the people who were responsible got blamed, and they said, okay, we're going to fix this. So they put all these changes into the system, including they do these practice drills. And the last one was in December of 2019. And in that drill, a man and a woman, Korean tourists visited China, came back with an unknown pneumonia, which it turns out the next month, Korea was dealing with COVID-19. So they were prepared. They had done this tabletop exercise. They knew how to set up the kind of diagnostic system. So as soon as they heard that there was an outbreak in China, they started to contact the companies that made the kits. So again, that was one of the reasons Korea had kits available so early, was the government actually reached out to companies to make kits very, very quickly. And actually it was 3 companies, and those companies, which are small, they're small, diagnostic companies, but they know what they're doing. And because they're companies, they were ready to start manufacturing. And that made a huge difference.
Wow.
So I think, this idea that we underestimate the flu, we underestimate infectious diseases. And, we gave people all sorts of grief because the big pandemic that we predicted in 2009 wasn't as big as we thought. So, maybe when we say, okay, here comes another one, we're like the boy who cried wolf. But it's true, underestimate these things and they will always take advantage of you. And, every single weakness in the US system was revealed. And the US really, when you look at our preparedness and there's a way of scoring pandemic preparedness of different countries. The US was #1.
Wow.
And it just reminds you that these diseases are like water. They'll find the weakest point, and
hopefully we learn a lot from this this pandemic. We have had. I'm not sure if you met up with Minnie Cole yet. She's actually in Incheon. She's from Honolulu. Honolulu girl. She's now residing in South Korea. I did let her know, and she's actually on the call right now. And I would love for you guys to connect because obviously both from Oahu. She's a consultant up there and works very closely with the Incheon government in this pandemic. So she's been on our show a few times and has shared a lot of important information on how South Korea is actually dealing with the pandemic. So hopefully you guys too can get together. I'd love to have the both of you on the show one night, but I know we're running out of time and I want to respect your time. Just a couple of real quick questions that are popping up. Vaccines, will they be available when everything is done and passed and approved? Will they be available for our seniors and others with underlying health conditions? And then the other part of the question is, can the US reach herd immunity before the vaccine is ready?
Yeah, two really important questions, but a little bit different. I think that the US has already started a plan to prioritize. And I'm saying this because we're participating in some calls with World Health Organization and others. And there's already an idea of who would get the vaccines first. And it's roughly 20% of the population. It's the elderly, people with underlying conditions, and healthcare providers. And so that's the first band of people, the people at highest priority and highest risk. And then each country will need to go through the different risk groups and do its own assessment of the priorities after that. But so, for instance, this Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, or CEPI, is working with another organization called Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. Gavi actually gives vaccines to the developing countries at low cost or no cost. And so they're working together to try to figure out how best to utilize the 2 billion doses of vaccine that CEPI believes it will have by the end of 2021. And I think, the idea right now is roughly about 20% of every country's need will be supplied initially to vaccinate the people at greatest risk. So the second question was around...
can we reach herd immunity before a vaccine?
So I think that the experience in Sweden will tell us that it's going to be a lot longer than we thought. The Swedes thought they would be at herd immunity basically by the end of April. And they're at maybe overall 7 to 10% immunity right now. They've had a higher rate of death than most of the other countries in Scandinavia. And if you look at the number of deaths for the size of population, I think Sweden's at the top or very near the top. They couldn't protect the elderly. We have to remember that, right now we've been kind of lucky, and people were very careful around, around the elderly, particularly in nursing homes and other long-term care facilities. But it only takes one, and the rates of mortality that we see are huge. I mean, if you look at New York, mortality rate in nursing homes was tremendous. And do we really want that to happen? So I think it'll be slower than we thought. We probably will have a vaccine before then. And just remember that all predictions have been, take it with a grain of salt. Because, for all the models that we have, the real world sometimes makes those models look kind of foolish. So let's just The most important thing, though, is that the government looks at the data. I mean, the Korean government does that frequently, looks at, what do we need to do? Where are the infections happening? How can we make this better? I mean, the government, the state of Hawaii, and I think the federal government should be really carefully looking at how do we open schools? What's the best approach? How do we take care of people who are in special populations? How do we provide enough supply of masks and gloves and face shields? All these things are things that the government should be thinking about making plans for. And adjusting those plans based on new information. If you do that, if you're stuck in the old mode, you may not be able to. So, for instance, in Korea, and actually be interesting to know Minnie's idea on this. But there was an outbreak in Itaewon in these large clubs. It was associated with an LGBTQ club or clubbing, and people didn't want to let the government know that they were there. So the government put out this thing and said, anyone who's been to any of these clubs, come in. So out of the 10,000 who were identified who is potentially exposed, 2,000 showed up. They were very concerned about being stigmatized. So the government said, okay, that's not going to work. So let's anonymize this. Just give us your phone number, come and get your test, and we'll send you the result. We won't know your name. And so 80% of people showed up. But you have to be willing to, do what's right for public health based on the data that you have. And at the end, the 300 infections were found in the result of that outbreak. They did 100,000 tests. It's quite a number of negative tests.
I think a lot of times, and we see it here, there's always this argument that when amount of tests go out, then you have the naysayers said, see, you put out 10,000, there was only one. But the thing is, we say, hey, at least we know that the thing didn't spread beyond that one, if that's how you want to look at it. But they look at it as saying, well, that one is, it doesn't support your argument that because this COVID cannot be dangerous if only one shows up. And so, like, my brother passed away from COVID in April in New York City. So I always tell people, one life is too many. And I said, when the dice was rolled, my brother's number got called up, and bingo, he lost his life. So I guess what we do now is they try to look for all these different arguments, and that was the importance of why I wanted to bring you on, because we have a lot of viewership. And he said, you guys gotta get the raw facts. You guys gotta get the raw data from someone who plays with this thing. It's almost like a lion tamer, right? He knows exactly how the lion's gonna react. You can't bring in anyone from the outside and say, here, take your whip and take your chair and go in there, and you do something wrong, the lion's gonna eat you. And I think that's how that some are playing with this virus. They're not taking that serious. But one question I did have: does blood type plays a role in how the vaccine reacts? Because they've been talking about if you're type A positive or AB positive or whatever. Does blood type play a role in this?
So there was a study that suggested that there might be a impact of blood type, but more recent, I think, evidence suggests that there isn't any.
Okay.
And it would be good if there were just some simple markers that we could use, but at this point, no. So I think so. Again, I haven't looked at the paper yet. I saw it in New York Times, which is, New York Times was not intended to be a medical journal, but sometimes, we see the information there first, like this most recent thing with the Oxford vaccine. I saw last night, late our time, that the Oxford vaccine clinical data was finally presented, but I saw it in the New York Times. Then I went back and I found the paper. But it's amazing, we hear about publications by press release or publications in the New York Times Medical Journal, and it's just amazing. Very different from the usual situation, from what we're used to.
Well, Doc, we've taken an hour of your time. We appreciate it. I will say, Minnie Cole did share with us the Itaewon experience. She shared with us the app that South Korea uses, that the QR code, which provides the phone number to the health department. She also shared with us about patient 31 that exposed a whole lot of people from religious function. I mean, we have, I mean, we feel more knowledgeable of what's going on in South Korea than what's going on here in Hawaii. So we appreciate you guys coming on.
No, it's hard, you know, and sometimes you're sitting. I mean, even here now, when we're watching what's happening in the United States, you know, you're shocked, but you feel a little, you know, dissociated from it. And, you know, I mean, what's happening now in Texas, and if I didn't have Peter and Maria Elena telling me every week, you know, it's getting worse, it's getting worse. Oh, sorry, I got to run. I'm going to be on CNN in 10 minutes. You know, it's hard to imagine. And when this doctor from Florida said, you know, we're running out of PPE again, like, okay, yeah.
It's you know, there's a genuine fear. You know, people accuse Charlie and I of being fear mongers, but you know, we bring on people like yourself and experts on the front line that are telling us exactly what's going on. It is what it is, and it's you know, I think we can learn from the facts and not the fears, not the Wall Street or the New York Times or the Guardian Island or the Star Advertiser, but from the people that are actually doing it. So I got to tell you, man, I'm just honored to have had this opportunity to have this discussion, man. I wish we had more time, but I realize you guys are doing important work for the world, and I'm just shocked that we are here. You're on our show, and we get to talk to you kind of face to face. Anyway, but local boy, right here from Hawaii.
Hey, you know, my mother worked for a couple of years on Kauai at the Veterans Memorial Hospital.
KVMH. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Yeah. And so I've been there quite a few times. So yeah, it's our favorite island to visit.
We had Dr. Kim here a while back. He was our family doctor for many, many, many years. Okay. I'm not sure if that's a relative or not, but
no, actually, you know, I'm the only doctor. That's not true. My cousin's a doctor, Raymond Chung. But yeah, not too many doctors in our family. Mostly lawyers, unfortunately.
Yeah, well,
you need them too.
I'd rather have doctors. Charles, any closing comments for the doc before we set him free?
Well, first of all, doctor, thank you so much. I appreciate it. You know, when we have guests such as yourself, the caliber of yourself and the information that you bring forth, you know, you take numbers and you make it very easy to digest. And especially I'm hoping that, you know, our viewers, they picked up a little tonight or a lot, however, you know, they choose to do it, to understand the importance about the mask and everything that goes along with it. For our viewers out there, it's, you know, we try our best, like Mel said, we try our best to bring on the experts, and, you know, we have them present the information, and whatever you can use it. Whatever you don't want to use, then fine. But our job is, we don't instill fear in anyone. We just give you the facts. So thank you again, doctor. And I'll see my cohorts. I went to Kamehameha, so no hard feelings.
My brother was head of school.
Oh,
Earl Kim.
Well, my cousin, actually, you might know him. You remember Bernie Ching? He used to be the custodian over at Iolani. Bernard Ching.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's my cousin. That's Sam Steamboat's brother, the wrestler, Sammy Steamboat.
Yeah, I remember Sammy Steamboat.
Yeah, so that's family.
Wow, small place, Hawaii. You know.
Yes.
Doc, any closing comments for the people of Hawaii? And we got people from Texas and all over on the show tonight. But yeah, we got a lot of people.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I really love talking to people back home. We didn't, you know, we were going to go, and our flights got canceled, and it you know, broke our hearts to not be able to go back in March. And you know, and I'm fingers crossed, and we're praying for you guys that everyone makes it through.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Doc. I'll just say this as I'm reading the comments, and I'm looking down because I'm reading the comments on my cell phone, and I got to tell you, you made a lot of people feel a lot more comfortable tonight. They're saying this was fascinating. Some people saying this was the best show ever. Just told more understanding of the vaccination or vaccine process. It's just a bunch of mahalos. I wish you could see this. I don't know if you have Facebook, but if you do, you can go check out my page or Charlie's page. You'll get to see
I'll
the
do that.
comments. Really good stuff, man. I appreciate Doc. Hopefully we can get you on one day as things change, man. We'd love to have you back on. I would love to have you and Minnie on, and just I'm gonna send over your contact information to Minnie so
Great.
that hopefully you guys can meet up. She's right there in Incheon. I was just there last year. I went to Seoul, went to Incheon with Minnie's mom, and
Wow.
had a wonderful time. So
It's
there's a little bit
incredible. You know, I had never been to Korea before working here. I mean, for an interview, but it's completely different from what I expected. And it's been lots of fun. Not exactly Hawaii,
Yeah.
but you know, for work purposes, I mean, I really enjoy what I'm doing, and I think everyone who works at IVI feels very committed to what our mission is. So that's probably the best thing. It's like being in the Army. Everyone feels good about what we're doing.
Well, you guys are doing great work. And if you guys need custodians, Charlie and I are available. We
Yep.
can come up with like a TDY thing. We can go.
All right.
Doc, thank you very much, Doc. God
Thanks.
bless you. Say hello to the family from all of us here in Hawaii, and stay
Thank you.
safe. Stay safe.
Yeah, you too. You two
The
both.
rest
Stay
of
safe.
y'all, we'll see you guys tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Everybody, God bless. Love you guys. Take care.
All right.
Aloha.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.